Hey, what is up, guys? It is OTO outside the Octagon podcast, and we're coming in with episode 5. I'm with my co-host Banning, who can introduce himself right now.
How's it going, guys? We had a pretty good card over the weekend to start the year off. Usually, we don't have a great card to start the year, but we had some great fights. A lot of guys winning, a lot of guys losing, a few guys losing their O that we saw, some pretty big upsets. And we have two champions who kept their belts. Another guy that we will talk about, as you guys know, a fan favorite for us on this podcast. We do have to discuss the future of a certain fighter on this card. And we're going to be looking forward to UFC 312 and UFC Fight Night Saudi Arabia, one better than the other. And the one that's better is not the pay-per-view. So a little preview going forward for the rest of this episode, but we got a lot to talk about as well. So let's get right into it. And we might as well start with the main event, which actually changed, as you guys know. Islam Makhachev defended his belt against Renato Money Moicano. We were both hoping for that Arman fight. We both said that if there's anyone that could ever beat Islam, it seems like it would be Arman. He was getting glazed a lot. He was the superstar of this card, it seemed like. Everyone was talking about him. This was his chance to go out and win the belt and become a star. And then he had to pull out. So, a lot of questions going on with this. Let's just start off with this fight itself. What did you think of this fight? We all kind of knew the outcome, but I think a lot of us were hoping maybe we would see a little bit of a spark. There was a little bit when Islam slipped. That definitely got the crowd hype. But how do you feel about this fight and how it went?
Yeah, so it did seem like usually the pay-per-views are centered around a fighter from their home country, something with a storyline to help the home crowd go out and support a fighter. And for 311, it was Arman Sarukin. I was unaware. I guess LA has a big Armenian population,
Mm,
but even they were
hmm
joking. Dana, Islam, and Nurmagomedov Umar was talking about it, how the Armenians, it was like a home field advantage for Arman, but he really wasn't giving much build up for the fight at all. Everyone was asking him questions in Armenian at the press conference. Everyone seemed to be there for him, ready for him. He was not giving any energy, promoting the fight at all. To me, it seemed like he knew he was going to pull out the whole time. It was just pretty weird that he really wasn't promoting his own title fight at all. A huge, highly anticipated rematch against Islam, and probably the guy who has the best chance at lightweight of beating Islam. But obviously, he pulled out a day before due to stretching it out with Nina drama. He couldn't help himself. But in my
hmm
opinion, it could have been a weight cut issue. I feel like he could have had a tough time there. Maybe he hurt the back in the weight cut, but either way, we got Renato Money Moicano. I know you're a fan of him. Um, that was as expected. I hoped I wanted him to put up more of a fight, get it, more. I think he would thrive in chaos there because if he sits back and goes by the game plan, Islam will win 10 times out of 10. And that's exactly what happened. Moicano talked about it afterward that Islam was just, he saw exactly what happened. Islam kind of baited him on the ground, and he has that new short arm Darce choke that he's been using since Poirier, that this is the second finish in a row now with it. It's very effective. And Islam, still, to be honest, looks pretty unstoppable at lightweight.
Yeah, and a lot of questions come out after this fight. Looking at this fight in the presser after, Dana White was very, very adamant that Arman is not fighting for the belt next. He was very upset about this. Usually we see when fighters pull out, obviously that changes the card a lot. But Dana White, every single person that asked him after, he gave a very, very strict answer saying that Arman's not fighting for the belt. They asked him what he was going to do next. He doesn't know, but he knows he's not going to fight for the belt. So this leaves us in a weird spot because he's the guy who I think most people can agree probably has the best chance against Islam. The other guys up there at the top of these rankings are guys like Charles Oliveira, which Armin beat earlier this year. That's why he was fighting for the belt. Do you give Oliveira the next title shot? I mean, obviously that's going to be able to sell because Charles is a massive superstar in his own right. It seems like everyone likes and respects him. But does that mean that he gets the fight just because Armin pulled out? We're in a very interesting spot. Also, we could easily just look at maybe the winner of Justin Gaethje versus Dan Hooker gets a title shot. We have a lot to think about for Islam next, or maybe he just goes up and fights Bilal. What do you think is the next best fight for Islam? If it's not going to be Arman, what do you do?
Yeah, so Islam obviously has had pretty easy work running through the division. No one's really gave him a huge fight besides probably Poirier after the Volk fight coming up from featherweight. But starting with Armin, I was pretty surprised that they're not going to rebook that. Maybe it's with Ramadan coming up and Islam doesn't want to fight within the next few months. Islam hasn't been too active, but he still fights once every 6 to 8 months, so it's not terrible for a champ defending his belt that many times. But yeah, so with Armin, I thought, to be honest, they would rebook that, even though maybe it seems like Dana might be frustrated about how it went, that it kind of ruined the top of the pay-per-view. But I really don't know. The only name I could think of for Armin that would really be a huge challenge would be Oliveira in the rematch. But we just saw how that went, so I really wouldn't want to see that, to be honest. But for Islam, outside of Armin, which is, if I could pick, I think he would be able to fight Armin next. The only guy at lightweight is Charles, another rematch in itself, which would be a good fight. As you said, he's a huge pay-per-view draw. But in my opinion, the I just wouldn't want to see that right now, because Armin's kind of stuck between fighting with Charles. There's no other lightweights right now that are really on the level of these three guys. But I think the choice is not moving up to welterweight to fight Bilal or Shafkat, whoever it is. That could be something down the road for Islam, maybe his retirement fight in the future, right before he retires. I think the fight's Ilya. It seems weird because I value champs defending their belts. I don't like guys bouncing up and down. But Ilya said he wants to move up to pause. But Ilya said he wants to move up to lightweight. If he's gonna do it, the time is now, and that is the perfect fight. I think that's not a slept on fight. Everyone knows how good Ilya is. These are two of the best pound for pound guys in the UFC. But I think Ilya, honestly, maybe more than Armin, would give Islam the hardest fight he's probably ever had in the UFC, barring his loss, 10 years ago. But Ilya's combination of BJJ and boxing could be really fun. If he's big enough, Islam is a very big guy. He's 5'11. Ilya's a lot shorter. But if Ilya's committed to moving up, I think the time is now, and it's perfect for Islam. As if it's not Armin, who else would it be?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this too, as well, this also ties into a bigger thing that we're having a problem with a lot of these champions is these rematches that we don't want to see. And part of this is we don't want to see Charles versus Islam right now, right away. Like you just said, we kind of know how that's going to go, especially like last time. The DDP versus Strickland fight, I think that one is a little bit more warranted because of how the first fight went. Do I think that it's going to be particularly close? We can talk about that later in the episode. But rematches as well, like Ilya, who's he supposed to fight next? Volk? We all know how that's going to go. Again, I mean, this is the guy that just knocked out Max Holloway, who's never been dropped before in his career, and he brutally knocked him out. And we're going to see him go up against Volk and probably do the same thing that he did to him in the first fight. Volk is really falling off at this point in his career. So he's getting older, and that's just kind of how it is, especially at those lighter weight classes. So it would make sense, if Islam's going to take a little while off, Ilya versus Islam would be the fight to make. Outside of that, though, I do agree. I do think if there's anyone in the UFC that should move up for a title fight, barring obviously Ilya moving up. I think Islam is the guy who should move up because that makes the most sense if he wants to fight Bilal. I do agree that maybe that's not the fight to do now. I think maybe we have to wait and see for that one. And honestly, I wouldn't even be surprised if maybe Islam waits. We get Shavkat versus Bilal, Islam versus Shavkat. If Shavkat beats Bilal, I mean, that's a massive fight as well. But for Islam, he's in this weird position right now. I think we can both agree that Armin would be the best fight next. But if Dana White really is this adamant, we'll have to see because obviously we know things can change. But Islam is going to take a little while off with Ramadan. And like you said, he usually fights twice a year. With him fighting in January, maybe that changes things a little bit. but I wouldn't be surprised. I do think it should be Armin next, but if it's not, I really have no idea what to do. Besides that, though, moving on in this division as well, I do want to talk about what's next for Moicano. We'll have to see exactly what happens with him. But he stayed at 10 in the rankings that came out today. He didn't move anywhere. But Neil Dariush, who obviously you wanted to see him fight your boy. This was his potential time to move up again in the rankings. There's a lot of guys up here as well. Like we said, there's those three guys at the top with Islam, Armin, and Charles. After that, there's a little bit of a gap. I think you could maybe argue that Justin Gaethje's up there, the winner of that, and Dan Hooker could maybe fight one of those two guys. But I still do agree there might be a little bit of a gap between them. But what's next for Moicano? Do you just rebook that fight, or maybe do we have Dariush fight against a guy who won and called him out on the same card in Grant Dawson, who is now ranked?
Yeah, so there's a ton to dig in here at lightweight. There's kind of been this like the era of violence, people like to call it, not to glaze, but it's a very exciting division from top to bottom. These guys, this old era of, Holloway at times, but the Gaethjes, the Poiriers, Oliveira's, so many exciting fights in the last 10 or so years. And it kind of seems like we're getting to a point similar to welterweight, where it's kind of starting to crumble, it's starting to crack at its base and Moicano put it best, but it's like the turtle in the tree when talking about Hooker. It's hard to matchmake right now because it seems like there's two different eras and two different levels at lightweight, if not more when you include Islam into that at the top. So right now, to bridge the gap between those 10 to 15 ranked guys and the guys above them, guys like Darius, guys like Moicano, you need to start booking it. It seems simple as that. You need to keep them active. The older guys like Poirier, I think he said himself he only has one fight left, which could be 314 in Miami. I've heard rumblings of that. But other rumors is obviously, as you mentioned, with Hooker and Gaethje fighting, that's another huge one where the winner of that, did they get Armin possibly? Are they in that era or tier of fighting for the belt? But in my mind, I want to see Moicano Dariush again. I dug into it more extensively on my channel, but I had Dariush winning that fight against Moicano. I know you like him a lot. I think he's pretty good. He was 3-0 in 2024. He had a great year. He's kind of having this resurgence in his career, but it's tough because Dariush is another older guy, 0-2 in his last two fights, who got completely erased off the card because of Armin. And Moicano, he shouldn't go down in the rankings. He should be at 10. I mean, Islam is that good. No one should go down really if you're all the way down there just for fighting Islam. It's like Roundtree versus Pereira, but I'd like to see that fight being rebooked. But then when you have like Grant Dawson, I'm a huge fan of. He has a deceiving record. I believe he's 21, 1-1 now. Pretty good. He just is kind of cracking into the rankings. When he lost to Bobby Green, I think he slipped right back out of it. But
Bobby? I know you like
yeah,
to call him
Bobby.
King Green.
No, 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 just Bobby Green.
Oh,
But
okay.
in my mind, it's a guy a lot of people like is Paddy Pimblett. You do like there's more guys down here, like the Dawsons, the Pimblets. There is another young era coming up. I just feel like they need to start booking them right now. I think Moicano Pimblett would have been an awesome fight, but at this point in time, I think Moicano Dariush is the fight to be rebooked.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, there's this division, there's a lot of different eras that we're looking at right now, and also guys moving up. Like we talked about, there's guys moving towards the bottom that are kind of falling out, like your boy King Green. I know you like to call him that. And then
No.
there's other guys that are coming up too as well. Like what happens if we see maybe Usman come over now that Umar lost? Now Mr. Habib and Ali camp, they're going to need to bring another guy over. They just lost Umar's O, so they're going to need to bring their buddy over. They might bring Usman over. Who knows? That would obviously change a lot of things up as well. There's a lot of interesting guys too who maybe not be highly ranked, but guys that we can look at that are interesting, that may end up in the rankings soon. But like you said, it's kind of not clogged at the top, but there are definitely different levels that we can look at. And it's kind of hard to book these guys because we can't really have these fights with these older guys you're not going to go out there like maybe we would see in the welterweight division where we have JDM at 4 and then a guy like Ian Gary at 7. That would work in something like that. But Dustin Poirier at 4 right now, we're not going to see Dustin Poirier versus a younger guy. We're not going to see like Paddy Pimblett go up against Dustin Poirier because he only really has that one fight left, like he said, and then he's done. And then he'll be out of the rankings, but he is obviously in that 4 spot right now. He's not going to be competing for a championship, but he's still very good. So we are in an interesting spot in that division. There's a lot going on there as well. But moving on to a lighter division, which we saw Marab coming in and winning the defending his championship, now officially the champion. A lot of people say that you have to defend the belt to actually be the champion. I know you may disagree as a big Conor McGregor fan, but Marab going out there and beating cousin Umar. I know we had very different thoughts on this fight. I said before I was never really that high on Umar. I know you were, so that's why it was going to be an interesting fight looking at this. And Marab went out there and he got it done. How did you feel about this fight? I know a lot of people had this first 2 rounds for Umar and then the next 3 for Marab. I don't think it was very controversial at all. I think pretty much everyone could agree on that. I actually, when I was judging this, I had Marab winning the first round. I forget which one of the judges also had that. But I think the first round was definitely way more competitive than people gave credit to. The second round was definitely Umar, but that first round was very close in my opinion as well. But Marab just went out there and proved that he probably has the best gas tank of all time.
Yeah, the first 2 or 3 rounds really showed. Umar says he has a broken hand, but injuries happen. It's fighting. But the first 3 rounds were dead even, really. I had a 48-47. Umar winning the first 2, losing the last 3. Maybe it was that broken hand that slowed him down. He could have thrown more kicks. But that is one thing I thought he was lacking was his kicks. He has great kicks, and I feel like it wasn't part of his game plan against Marab, which it really should have been. But I thought it was 100% 48-47, easy win or not easy, but definitive win for Marab. I don't really see the argument for Umar winning that fight at all. But Marab looks very good. I'll say, yeah, I was very high on Umar when he fought Sandhagen at that fight night in the summer. He looked absolutely incredible against one of the best names in the division. And in my opinion, I also don't think it lowered his stock, Umar's stock at all. He did lose. He did look gassed. I'll say it might have lowered the team stock, honestly, because you know how hard they train, how hard they work in the mountains. There's no breaks, no time off. And wow, Marab just looked like on a whole nother level in terms of stamina. And he probably does have the best stamina in UFC history. I just can't imagine beating that. But Marab's style is tough. It's gritty and it's hard to beat. I really don't know who can beat him. We've said it before, but whoever won that fight looks poised to be champ for a long time. And Marab does look poised to be champ for a long time. I'm really not sure what guys like Sean O'Malley, kind of taller, lankier guys who are striking based, can do about Marab. He's proven he doesn't get tired. You're going to have to land a great shot. Um, but Umar did look very, very good. Marab 100% won, but he was taunting, he was clip farming on Umar in the middle of the fight. That was incredible to see. You've never seen a Team Nurmagomedov guy get humbled like that. Usually it's the complete opposite happening. So
Mhm.
Marab's energy and activity, I love to see stuff like that. I gave him a lot of criticism in the past for being a very boring fighter, not doing any damage. I thought Umar was going to come out here, be able to defend the takedowns and land way more damage on the feet, which he did land a lot of damage. But Marab was swinging, he was dealing damage on the ground. He didn't exactly go for submissions. It was just more freestyle wrestling, but Marab looked very incredible. You can't deny that. And going to his resume, wow, the bantamweight is a newer division, and we've talked about it before with guys like Sean O'Malley. He defended about one time, and we were already thinking a few more fights. He could be in that top tier, that upper echelon of bantamweights of all time. So when you say stuff like that, and then Marab humbles both of these 2 guys, Marab's resume is incredible from Jose Aldo, Piotr Yan, Cejudo. A few more wins for Marab, and we could be saying some uncomfortable conversations soon. But I would like to say after that fight, Marab looked pretty unbeatable, I'd say. He looked completely fine all 5 rounds in the corner, never even sat on the stool. He was stood up, he was laughing, he was talking. He looked incredible. He was swinging. Umar didn't really seem to phase him. So, what is the next fight you book at the top of the division? Because I'll start with I don't think you can give O'Malley the immediate rematch. I think O'Malley needs a contending fight. I would like someone like Sandhagen, maybe even Umar. Um, but a fight for Umar, I think, is Davison Figueiredo after the loss. I think that's a very talented guy, striking and grappling base, similar to Umar. So that would be fun to see if Umar really is deserving of this upper ranking. But for Marab, I think you have to do Piotr Jan. I think that has to be the next fight. He did get taken down like 49 times, I believe, or he attempted 49 takedowns. But I just think O'Malley needs to prove that he deserves to be up here before you give him the rematch. So who do you have next for Marab at bantamweight?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go in the opposite direction. I do think that it is Sean next. I do think that, especially if you're the UFC, if you want to book that big fight, I think Sean O'Malley is that fight next. It is kind of weird, like you said, it's a newer division, so there may not be as much prestige. And with O'Malley defending that belt as well, he also beat Aljo, who many people had up there as an all-time bantamweight, so we can't forget about that. Goes out and defends the belt after that. So two very good wins. Loses to Marab. I wouldn't be surprised if he is the guy that gets the rematch. My thing with Umar too, before, I mean, he kind of got that fast track to the championship. He got that win, obviously. And that was really his only top 10 win before that. He really bust into the scene with that one. Um, in my opinion, I do think that it makes sense to do the Sean O'Malley rematch. And then you have Umar versus Piotr Jan because Jan beat Figueiredo. So I do think that Umar did go down a little bit with that fight, moving to number 3. But I think that would be a perfect number 1 contender fight if you do the Sean O'Malley versus Marab rematch. And then you have Jan versus Umar. The winner of that goes on and gets to fight Marab as well. But if you don't give O'Malley the rematch, I think, like you said, Jan does deserve this. And then maybe we have Sean O'Malley versus Umar. That would be an interesting fight as well. But the thing with Sean O'Malley is he's entering a dangerous spot right now because if he loses against Marab in this rematch, he's stuck in that Max Holloway Volk area where he's going to be number 1. He's going to be number 2. And he's already fought and lost to the champion twice. So you're in a very weird spot where Marab, a guy that could wipe out this division for the next few years if he wanted to, depending on how long he wants to fight. And you're not going to be able to get a title rematch because you lost to the champion twice. The same thing that happened to Max Holloway, obviously going up against Volk 3 times. So it would be an interesting spot if O'Malley loses. I do think that's what they should do right now. One thing I do want to talk about as well is what you brought up. Is Marab the bantamweight GOAT? I know a lot of people may have not really thought about it as much, but after that title defense, like you said, I mean, this guy's resume all time is absolutely insane. When we look at these last 5 fights that he's had, going up, defeating the undefeated Umar, going up, defeating Sean O'Malley, beating Henry Cejudo, absolutely dominating him as well. He clip farming against Henry Cejudo as well in that fight when he picked him up. And I mean, we can't forget Henry Cejudo, 2 division champion, as well as an Olympic level wrestler. Then beating Piotr Jan as well, who is a former champion, and then beating Jose Aldo in these last 5 fights. I mean, Marab really might be up there all time if he isn't the best. I think you can make an argument right now. I know a lot of people still are in that boat where maybe he has to defend 1 or 2 more times, which I completely agree with. But I mean, the difference between these fights, these wins, is he's absolutely dominating these guys. Like Umar, you can give him 2 rounds, but at the end of this fight, you usually don't see fights that are 48-47 and people go away saying, oh, well, that was almost not an easy fight, but Marab definitely dominated in that last 3 rounds. So it is interesting. I know a lot of people may still point to Dominic Cruz, but I wouldn't I don't think it's a bad argument to say that Marab might be above him resume wise right now.
Yeah, it's definitely very hard to say. And as we mentioned earlier, you have guys where Sean O'Malley, a lot of people have Aljo as the bantamweight GOAT. Sean O'Malley knocks him out in 2. like what happens then? So it's really about building a resume. It's not just one fight because all of these guys, it's kind of what bantamweight has evolved to in recent years, where this cycle of violence of Sandhagen, Jan, Yadong, like these guys who just keep beating each other, and they all one guy gets the belt, he gets beat, but and then like a guy like Peter Yan, who I think should fight Murab next, he's been so unlucky. Whether it's the knee to the head to Aljo or the O'Malley fight, which at the time I had O'Malley winning, but looking back, Jan probably won that fight. Who knows what happens if Jan does get that decision? But I grew up watching. They got me into the sport, like Dillashaw, um, and Dom Cruz. And when you look at it all the time, Aljo has to be up there at least. But Marab's resume compared to those, he hasn't lost in a long time since his first fights in the UFC. He's been on an undefeated run since then. And although he's getting a lot of decisions, not a lot of finishes, he's doing it in dominating fashion. He's really not getting hurt most of his fights. He doesn't even look tired in most of his fights. So I think the next fight is where we can really start talking about Merab. Who, if it's O'Malley, that would really only be better for his all-time resume. Because to be honest, I hope O'Malley has a better game plan next time. He managed to hurt him like one time in round five, but he really didn't touch Merab at all. He was getting kissed in the middle of the championship fight. So I think you give Merab Yan next, but for me, I have guys like Dom Cruz and Dillashaw at the top, and then I can't put Merab in there right now because you don't really know what's going to happen. But I think in one more fight, we'll definitely see. I would have. I think I'd probably have Merab as the GOAT. Honestly, I'd one or two more fights. I think would be close enough to do it.
Yeah, I think either way you look at it, he's definitely close if he's not already there. I think you could definitely make the argue with his resume already. But another guy that we can talk about moving on to the featured fight of the night between Yuri and your boy Jamahal Hill. Going into this fight, I told you guys in the last two episodes that I would bet any amount of money on Yuri going into this fight. This was the most confident I felt in a fight. But, Jamal Hill did surprise me. He went out there and yes, he got knocked out, but he didn't get knocked out the way that I thought he was. I thought this was going to be an easy run through for Yuri. But Jamal Hill surprised me. He gained some respect from me, if that means anything to him in the end. He still does get the Twitter Fingers of the Year award from last year, if you guys haven't watched our previous episode. But maybe this time he gets it with a little bit more respect. I'll write a little nice letter to him when we ship that out as well, instead of just sending it. I'll say, at least you gave it a good try. So with that being said, what is next for Yuri? Because now, we were talking about the Sean O'Malley dilemma earlier. We were talking about what we saw as well from when we had Max Holloway versus Volk and Yuri in that same exact position right now. Obviously losing to Pereira twice. But besides that, I think people forget about how good he's been. I mean, a guy that went through and got a championship within a few fights of getting into the UFC, dominating that time as well. And, without that shoulder injury in the past, who knows where he would be right now. I think people forget about just how bad that shoulder injury was for him to even come back as well. And for him to come back and continue to get these wins. But he happens to be going up against one of the toughest power punchers that we've ever seen in the sport. Alex is fighting Magomed Ankalaev next in that championship fight. But after that, if Pereira wins, do we see Yuri fight again? They asked Dana White about it, and he said that I think a lot of people would like to see this fight again just because of how maybe they may not have been close when we look at the scorecards. But I mean, Yuri did get knocked out twice, but those stare downs that we saw, the aura of these fights is always insane every single time. So is that next for him? Or do we see him fight maybe in a number one contender fight?
Yeah, so that Hill and Yuri fight, a lot was going through my mind after the fight. I 100% took Hill. I don't regret it, but Yuri showed there's levels to the striking. Hill's had the same, honestly, both of these guys have had problems in their striking with their technique, their form. It's been critiqued a lot. Jamal Hill has terrible sloppy footwork. It's hard to notice, but once you do, it's hard to forget. He really is just so flat-footed. He overextends, and against someone like Glover, who was kind of old and just taking damage, um, it worked out very well because he was getting himself in weird positions, landing a ton of damage, overextending, overreaching. But against Yuri, he was like button mashing during the fight. He was bouncing up and down. He was moving around, but I love it. That's what he does. He talked all week about he's been evolving. He's been learning to put his hands up to defend himself better, not block with his head. But he really went back to his old ways in the fight, and it did happen to work. I will say though, when you go to Pereira, guys with really heavy hands like that, I don't think he can beat Pereira. There was times that it was close, but he has to really change his game if he needs to. You can't be this like striker that takes the damage and hits harder back. You can do it against Jamal Hill, but I think Pereira will just knock him out again. However, I've said it many times. I do value activity. Someone has to fight for the belt. I'd rather have someone defending it twice in a year than waiting for the rightful guy and only defending it once in a year. So after the Ankalaev fight was announced at 311, I do think that fight is a little. I think people are kind of looking past Ankalaev, but the first thing that came to my mind was the Blackowitz fight when Pereira first moved up to light heavyweight. However, once again, though, he's evolved so much since that fight. It really, you didn't notice it at the time, but looking back, he's such a better, well-rounded MMA fighter than he was back then. He was really used to just his kickboxing and relying on that. So I wouldn't look past Ankalaev, but it will be his first real test against like a wrestling-based opponent. Even though Ankalaev is great striking, but let's say Pereira does win, which I would say he will, but and, anything can happen. I wouldn't look past it. The Yuri Hill fight, in my mind, was the title contender fight. I don't think you need to give Hill another fight because I'm not sure who it would be. Blackowitz is already booked against Olberg. Um, and I would have Yuri fight again, honestly. I think the trilogy is the most you can do before it's like beating a dead horse. Because who knows if the Izzy Pereira, they fought like what, 5 times now in total since their kickboxing days. So I'd like to give Yuri one more try if he really has evolved, changed his ways. But at the moment, I just don't think he can get by Pereira. But I think Yuri deserves a title shot after that performance against the next most likely guy in Jamal Hill.
Yeah, and like you said, it's a very interesting spot that we're at right now. I think we could potentially see if we're gonna have to wait a little while anyway, for Alex to fight, because obviously it'll be in 2 cards from now, and we'll see Jan fight in that same month of March anyway. I think it would make sense if they do want to have a number one contender fight to have Yuri fight Jan, just because we haven't seen that yet. Jan has given Pereira, like you said, probably the biggest toughest matchup that we've seen in light heavyweight so far. Obviously, Khalil Roundtree was going out there and striking pretty well with him, but I mean, many argued, especially at the time, people thought that Jan may have won that fight against Pereira. That was 3 rounds. Obviously, a lot could change. But I mean, I still definitely think there's contenders for Pereira to fight. We're talking about guys that potentially he could fight. So it is good to see that there are guys for him to fight. If he's going to have another 3 fights this year, I mean, it would be perfect for him to go through the top 3. If he could go through Magomed, Ankalaev, and then if he wins that, even though he is the underdog right now on the odds, it is very close, but I believe he was plus 110 this weekend. I just looked right now. He's down to minus 105. Ankalaev's minus 115. So still very close. I'm sure money's going to be put on Pereira. But if he can go through and fight Ankalaev, get that rematch, or I guess the third fight against Yuri, and then have the rematch with Jan. I mean, we're talking about a resume that might not ever be beat from a guy like that. Obviously, John Jones going through the light heavyweight division may be the best fighter of all time, but Pereira is going to be very close up there if he can go through these 3 guys as well towards the end of the year. But there's definitely guys for him to fight. This is one of those divisions where, yes, he's already fight some of these guys, but I mean, I don't think people would mind seeing these fights again just because of how entertaining they are. And honestly, I mean, seeing Pereira fight almost anyone, they could throw some random guy in off the street, and I think people would be excited to see that as well.
That's what they
But
did when he fought Jamal Hill. But
yeah, well, even though they did try to fight in the Apex or whatever the performance center. But like you said last episode, John Mahal had his mic muted, so he had to go fix that. That's why he walked away. But I do want to know what is next for John Mahal. In my opinion, I do think, since that fight that got kind of worked out before, I do think you should just rebook him versus Khalil Roundtree. I think that would be a great fight to see. I don't know if you have another idea as well, but currently, I think that would be a great fight to see. John Mahal's at 4, Khalil Rountree's at 7. I think that would be an entertaining fight to see.
Yeah, I mean, after I saw the fight, there was only one name that popped into my mind. It is Roundtree. I'd love to see that fight. Obviously, they both got knocked out by Pereira, but who hasn't at this point in anyone near his weight class? Okay, I suppose you, um, but Hill is very good. He gets himself stuck in bad situations with how kind of sloppy his striking is. I think he relies on that chin that's kind of showing to be not as good as maybe he thought it was. But that's how the knockout started against Yuri. He overextended, got caught completely facing the wrong direction, and it was just a punching bag for Yuri to knock down. So I'd love to see the fight with Roundtree. Both great strikers, both have a ton of power, and both are, on that level where Jamal Hill had the belt. Roundtree was on a great run before he fought for the belt. So with Yuri, hopefully getting to fight the winner of Ankalaev versus Pereira, I think Hill and Roundtree is a great fight for one of them to establish themselves as really getting off this losing streak and establishing themselves at light heavyweight.
Yeah. So moving on from light heavyweight to a division where obviously we have a lot of clogging at the top because of the two guys and having two champions currently in the heavyweight division, which is still doesn't make sense to me at all. But we're still waiting to see that John Jones versus Tom Aspinall fight. But besides that, what we saw this weekend, we saw Jailton Almeida go out there. He got the win. Pretty big favorite in this fight for a good reason. He kind of is the guy towards the top that a lot of people were glazing him, and he's proven that he can be a top contender right now. He's moved past that point of being a prospect. He is a contender now. He's got up to that point. Obviously, he did lose to Curtis Blades. Many people may have fallen off of his hype train then, but these past two wins, getting that rear naked choke against Romanov, and then getting the knockout of Spivak in this last fight, he's definitely proven that he can be up there towards the top. He did call out Cyril Gahn, which is, I mean, we can talk about that. Is that the fight for the number one contender fight if we do see Tom Aspinall versus John Jones? And then also we have to talk about what's going to happen with Volkov, even though he won that fight against Cyril Gahn, um, even though the judges didn't give that to him. It's heavyweight is a very big mess right now. Cyril Gahn did not deserve that win. I think almost everyone agrees. Cyril Gahn was walking out because he thought he lost. They gave him the decision. So I mean, this is still the worst division. Tai Tuivasa is ranked 11th. How do we fix the heavyweight division right now? We had a big fight this week, and it seems like that just almost makes things more complicated.
Yeah, it's just straight up bad at the moment. Tai Tuivasa should be in the GFL, the Grandpa
Mhm.
Fight League going on right now, but it is quite ridiculous. I mean, we've gone over it with Tai many times, but who knows what's going on in the division?
Well, he
Um,
just actually quickly he just said that on Instagram he's not fighting until next year. I don't know if
Tai
that's
said
true or
that.
not. He said in the comments they asked when they're going to see him this year. He said, "Brother, I'm not fighting until next year."
Okay.
So that just
And that's interesting. I hope he's doing one of those, I haven't fought since last year, New Year's type of jokes, but
mhm.
I mean, I hope he gets cut. I'll just say it. But going through the division, it really is completely backlogged. I mean, it's the only division, thanks to Dana White, I'd say, where it kind of the rankings kind of go like that, and then they go wide if like you can fight one champ or the other champ, like which one's the real belt. They both have had them for much over a year now, which is pretty ridiculous. In my mind, the interim should be merged as fast as possible. It shouldn't take long to do it. If Jones is going to be that guy, I love Jones. He's the GOAT, but probably should just give up the belt, retire. move down, do anything. I can't stand holding up the belt like this. But Aspinall, I guess I'll call him the champ. I don't really know anymore. It according to Dana White, but there's that huge
Uh,
backlog at the top where gone. I don't know if you can call it rigged or just blatant, just idiocy by the judges, but I don't know what you
the
can call
heavyweight
it. But
judges are not good. I mean, we saw
yeah,
Tai Tuivasa get that 30-27. I don't know what happens with these heavyweight fights, but I don't know. They don't get the good judges for these fights, which isn't good
yeah.
either.
And it almost seems like the whole division is going through CTE or getting hit too many times in the head. Everyone from Dana White to the fighters to the judges to the referees, every single part of it. You have Pavlovich fighting all the way down to Rosenstrike at 9, which is fair. He's lost a lot of stock recently, but I think the fight at the top right now is Gane versus Volkov. I think they should just rebook it, make it, I don't know, have judges that know what sport they're watching. That could help. But when you go down to Almeida, he has a very simple game plan. I think the best choice he made is, which I urge every light heavyweight. I think Ryan Spann might have done the journey too of moving up to heavyweight. It seems like none of them have any idea what they're doing. They're just running around like chickens with their head cut off, really fat, no training, no cardio. We had Romanov versus De Lima, I believe, where they both Romanov won and got cut after winning a ranked fight, which just shows the state of the division. But Almeida has a very simple game plan every fight. He does the same thing, and it works against these heavyweights who have no idea how to stop him. They're just not athletic enough. So I would keep pushing Almeida. That Blades loss was so disappointing. He did the same game plan that he always does, and then just he got dropped by like very small hits, it seemed like. So that was pretty confusing, and he lost a ton of steam from that. But I think you have to pay Jones, even if you have to restructure the entire like fighters' wage contracts going on. You have to pay Jones pretty much whatever he wants to merge with Aspinall. I'm sick of the entire division being ruined because of it. And then you just need guys. Almeida is really the only name right now that's moving up on a or not even on a win streak because of Blades, but at least moving up as a prospect, a true prospect, as you said. So there's not too much momentum with Almeida, but Jones and Aspinall has to happen next. But I'll move on to another guy in a division down in middleweight. Sad to say at the Kevin Holland fight. He moves on to 1-5 at middleweight. He's on or one out of his last five in middleweight. He's on a very bad run. I have a lot to say, but I'll start with you. What would you like to say? Maybe even urge Kevin Holland a message if you could tell him some advice for his fighting career.
Well, I know after this fight, I do want to say, I think some words were said. We were a little emotional. I know you said that we might have to change the logo and everything, but we're just being emotional in the time. This is
Yep.
when we have to stay with the boy. He will be back. He said he wants to fight 6 times this year. It's okay if you go 5-1. Get the loss out of the way now. RDR is a weight bully. Let me pull up this statistic for you guys. This isn't fair. Kevin Holland came into the fight at 190. RDR came in at 212. There's no way Kevin Holland's winning this fight with the weight bully there. RDR came in 15% over of an increase of when he weighed in from 185 to 212. I mean, it's just not fair, in my opinion. RDR came in actually. Yuri Prohaska fought on fight night at 208 and RDR fought at 212. So, I mean, you can take that however you want to take that as well. He came in 4 pounds over Yuri on fight night. Jamal Hill was whatever, 280 or whatever, but that's a different conversation. But Kevin Holland, something's got to change right now. Back against the wall. This is what you need. You need to come out here and you need a big victory. He said he was going to be shocked if he got tapped out. I mean, it just was a bad fight from him. I don't really know what was happening. He didn't really have a fight, if we're being honest. He went out there, didn't do much, sat on the ground for a little bit. He was fighting back. He was giving those kicks on the ground, but he didn't get back up. I don't know what was going on. He decided not to try to get back up. RDR, I mean, maybe we'll look back on this and RDR will be pretty good in the future. We can talk about that. I know you're not a big fan of him, but I can't argue with this one. The last fight, that was definitely CGI. Kevin Holland with a fake injury. That doesn't count. I'm still not counting the Dolidze fight. But this one, I mean, it's pretty hard to argue against. These fights that we've seen before that, I mean, you can get away with losing to JDM. I mean, that if you're going to have a loss, that's one that has been, I mean, that's been justified so far. Obviously, JDM is going to be a guy that's going to be fighting for a belt soon as well, at welterweight as well. But now, obviously, moving up to middleweight. So that MVP fight, just a weird fight overall. He had no idea what he was doing. Comes out with an armbar earlier last year in the summer, and then loses to Dolidze, which I don't really count, like I said, and then gets embarrassed by RDR. If you want to fight 6 times this year, you're gonna have to try to fight and win. You need to win your next fight because right now, yes, you're technically on a 1-2 run, but before that, you have 2 losses. You're 1-4 in the past 5. You need to go out there and do something. I mean, people are calling for you're going to have to fight someone down in the rankings. Whoever that is, if that's I don't even know. Maybe you can give me a name for him to fight. But you got to find someone that you can go out there and beat, or you're going to be entering a very bad area right now. Maybe he should just be a heavyweight because with this ranking and this record, he would probably be right up there in the top 10 with Tai Tuivasa if he was a heavyweight. But, it's not all sunshine and rainbows in a premier division right now, like middleweight.
We've mentioned it before. We're a big believer in it. You have to back your boys. However,
Hmm.
I was very hurt. I'll be honest by his actions on Saturday night. I was very hurt by it, but the Leeds fight obviously didn't happen. That wasn't real. And then the tap was very unfortunate. I'm just not sure what he's doing. If you want to be that journeyman, that money guy, I think maybe it got to his head in 2020 of like, oh, I can be active. I don't even have to win if I'm active. I can make money. People love me, but his PR is not even great anymore. People are turning on him. We will
Hmm.
never, as much as I want to, I will not do it. But I do have a name for him, as you said, a great name. It's actually Mario Bautista. I think would be a great fight. Open weight.
Hmm.
Actually, no, have it at heavyweight. I hope he murders a fight to the death, untimed. Get Kevin Holland back in the win column. But I've the first thing I'll start off with is Kevin Holland was dominant at welterweight. He was a staple of the bottom of the rankings, being that kind of gatekeeper to the rankings. He beat a lot of very good guys. He destroyed Buckley, who's now making a contender run almost, it seems like. And then guys like JDM, he could have easily beaten in that fight. But he moves up to middleweight. Maybe he doesn't want to cut. Who knows what. But when the California commission comes out, he's pretty much not weight cutting at all at
Hmm.
middleweight. That was kind of infuriating to see. If you want to be like, who knows? He says he doesn't care about the belt. I'm starting to believe him. It seems hard. You would think you would get more money if you move up in the rankings. Someone should tell him how that works. If but either way, he's not cutting weight like at all. Jay Rader was like 30 pounds heavier than him. I think if you're Kevin Holland, instead of fighting 6 times a year without cutting weight, which is an option, and you lose 4 of them, I'd rather see you fight 2 times a year. You cut weight and you win both of them. I think it's very simple. He was a lot better as a lanky welterweight. He was like one of the best strikers in the division. I would say that with his superior reach and size over everyone. He was very, very good and hard to beat. Now he's undersized. Like the Leeds, just sat on top of him, and Kevin Holland did nothing about it. De Ritter just sat on top of him. Holland had nothing to do to stop them. He has to move down. He looks like he's not even trying. He was too busy trying to fight Rampage Jackson. I'm not really sure what is going on through his head, but I do like that he wants to fight 6 times a year. In my mind, step one, Kevin Holland, you move back down to welterweight, and then you fight 2 times a year, you win both of them, and you can go back in the rankings. Right now, he's very far from the rankings, very far. I'd be the one to say that. It's not long ago he was fighting guys like Dolidze, who's a top 10 ranked guy right now, but I haven't been a huge fan of DeRitter. I love when the UFC signs guys from other orgs, and I love DeRitter as a fighter, but his actual fighting style, his striking is so bad. It is so undisciplined. It is so sloppy. He has no stamina, and he made that fight look so easy. Where he just struggled against Gerald Mearshart, which is someone that Kevin Holland should have been not even worried about a few years ago. So, I mean, it says one thing. I think that Ritter should get a ranked fight after this, in my opinion. Maybe you give
Hmm.
him a Jack Hermanson, one of these heavier guys, maybe even Paulo Costa Delize, one of these heavier guys at middleweight. But for Kevin Holland, you got to move back to welterweight. He's very far away from the rankings right now, so that's my plan of advice for him. And I hope at next year at this point we're gonna have our end of the year rankings. He could be fighter of the year. He could go 6-0. I'd like to see it at welterweight, not middleweight.
Yeah, I mean, honestly though, if we got to come up with a name, because I don't think he's not going down. He said he just wants to fight here. Unfortunately for him. But we got to find a name for him. And I mean, another guy who may be in that same area of a potential guy that may be on the edge of that losing streak and really falling off would be a guy like Paul Craig, who's lost his last three. That'd be an interesting fight to see. Stylistically, for Kevin Holland, I mean, it's tough because you want him to go up against a striker. I think that's his best chance of winning at this point, because it seems like he just can't fight guys that can wrestle in this division no matter what. Um, so I don't know what you really do now if you're him, because you're at this point where you can't give him a no-name guy. Like Kevin Holland, like you said, he's pretty far from the rankings, but you can't give him a no-name guy because he is still good. Like he's a top 30 guy in this division, which is far from the rankings, but he is on the edge of that area where if you go and give him a guy that is just coming in, the difference obviously with RDR is he's proved in the past that he is a two division champion in another organization. So it's not like he's a no name guy in that sense, but you can't just bring in some guy that you want him to fight against Kevin Holland because he is still good. He's still skillful. He'll go out there and get a win, but you need a guy that's really going to test him. And obviously, he's not going to be able to fight into the rankings anymore at this point. But you need to find him a guy, maybe a guy like Paul Craig, obviously coming off that loss to Bo Nickel, before that losing to Berhalio, losing to Brendan Allen. So a guy that's had three straight losses in Paul Craig against very good guys. But I mean, you need someone like that. Maybe we see the rematch against Mearshart, who did. I mean, Kevin Holland did beat him before, but I don't know. You need something right now. You need a win where not some random guy that's not going to do anything for you, but a guy with at least a name that may not be higher up, but at least a guy that will help you bring that winning streak back. If he wants to fight 6 times this year, that would be great. But you really need to go out there and you need to get a win in this fight. The positive thing is since he tapped out so early in the fight, he didn't take much damage
Yeah.
since he going into this fight camp, his whole thing was I would be very surprised if RDR taps me out. I would be shocked, and I think RDR is going to give up. Um, so unfortunately, that's what happened to Kevin Holland, but I don't know. Maybe give him he needs to fight someone that he can beat. Um, Maybe you bring back Gerald. Maybe you have him go up against Paul Craig. I don't know. Maybe you have another name in mind because I don't think he's moving down as much as we want him to. It just doesn't seem like he's going to.
Yeah, and Kevin Holland's so young. He really shouldn't be at this point in his career. If he loses the next two, I mean,
It's
PFL,
over.
who knows?
Not
But
even.
yeah, GFL maybe, who knows? But could be a backyard fight club. He could take on Death Wish. That could be a good shout, a striking base guy. Um,
Mm.
but when you look at names like I would agree with guys like Mearshart and Paul Craig, who are probably top 25-ish middleweights when you go all the way down. I just don't. He'll probably get choked out. I'll be honest. I'll say it. I'm losing hope. I just don't think he has any effort on the ground. He has good grappling. Oleg Jakik, he armbarred him instantly after getting dropped. It was beautiful to see his last win, but I just don't think he even attempts to try on the ground anymore. He's like, if I get taken down, you beat me, you got me. But so I would like to see those. But to be honest, Paul Craig and Mearshot will probably tap him out again, and then he can be a backyard fight club member. But I would like. I'm trying to look at names here, and I like Armin Petrosyan, maybe a striking base guy. Who out of the rankings, Marc Andre Barrio, like guys who are not very good but still striking base. I think is the only option left for Kevin Holland.
Yeah, and hopefully he does fight in, it seems like March, if he wants to fight every 6 months, if he wants to fight 6 times this year. I think he will fight. If they let him, he's gonna fight 5 or 6 times. I mean, unless he goes 0-5 this year, the UFC is not gonna cut him. I mean, he's a big enough guy, where unless he loses every single fight this year, then they kind of have to. But if he skims his way through this year, but you know what? You got to get that loss out of the way as well. And then he can go on a 5 fight winning streak to get that battle at the end of the year. And talking about getting losses out of their way, a lot of the time we've talked about this before. Sometimes it is better to lose towards the beginning of your career, like we've seen before. Guys like Islam, guys like Marab 0-2 in his first 2 fights in the UFC. Sometimes it's better to lose and kind of get that reality check. And 3 guys that happened to this weekend, all losing their O's. Some big names in Peyton Talbot, Nakamura and Carpenter also lost their O's this weekend. This is the point where, like I said, sometimes it's better to take your loss now and learn, because a lot of guys get to that point where they get towards those bigger fights, sometimes even a championship fight, and they get completely outclassed then. And it's almost worse to lose when you're at a higher level. Sound like it would be, but sometimes you get up there and you take that loss and your career really takes a turn. Like we saw with Dominic Reyes, even just after that, he was just so mentally kind of out of it, obviously coming back now as well. But there's just been some big examples of that in the past. I know a lot of people sometimes fall off the hype train as well. People already saying that maybe Peyton Talbot isn't that good. So I know you were a big fan of Nakamura as well. So I wanted to talk about these 3 guys in particular. Are there any of them that you still really believe in? Are you too worried about any of these losses, or have you given up on any of them?
Yeah, so I think it's varying for all of them, but Peyton Talbot, I mean, not really worried about him to be honest. It
Hmm.
happens. Striking base guys, you get grappled. You got to work on it. You got to grow. He's so young.
Like Kevin
I'm really,
Holland.
yes. I wish I could say that they're in the same point in their careers, but yeah, you think they would learn. But Peyton Talbot,
Hmm.
I liked what I saw. He was doing good striking, but Barcelos had a good like chain wrestling game plan that just Talbot had nothing. He had nothing to do to stop it really, and it's kind of like the Marab O'Malley fight where these striking guys they kind of get complacent on the feet. That's where when you're fighting a guy who's going to wrestle you the entire time like that, you have to use your time on the feet to get points for the judges, to get a finish. You can't just be complacent there. I feel like they get comfortable there. And then every 5 seconds they're on their feet, there's 50 seconds they're going to be on the ground where the other guy's racking up position and racking up points in the judge's eyes. So Peyton Talbot, I'm not worried about. Um, he's still, it does definitely slow down the hype, but he built up a ton of goodwill for himself in a very short amount of time. Maybe he was kind of like with doing a different type of grappling with Frank Ocean too much. Should have been
Mm.
working on BJJ possibly. Maybe instead of no gi, maybe throw a gi on, cover
Yeah,
yourself up a little
maybe
bit.
throw an extra J on that BJJ. Make sure you get
Yeah,
that second J on there next time.
yeah. Keep it on there, by the way. But that pole dancing, get rid of that. Maybe start doing some wrestling training, some stuff like that. But I'm not too worried about Peyton Talbot. It happens. Even Sean O'Malley, you can just do his game plan. Just pretend it never happened when you lost back in the day. So,
Yeah.
uh, but going down, Rinny Nakamura, I was very hyped for that fight. I thought he would show that he's ready to be a top 20 guy and start to look for fights that would eventually get him in the rankings. But I love his wrestling background. And Gafurov, he is from Tajikistan. People like to categorize and stereotype him. He's not just a wrestler. He's really I thought Nakamura would be the better wrestler throughout the fight, and he was dominated on the feet and on the ground, which was very disappointing. Gafurov is kind of a low ceiling guy. I think he has no, yeah, I guess like high floor, low ceiling. Like he has a ton of potential to win these fights, but I don't think he has the potential at all to even be a ranked fighter. So Nakamura, I lost a ton of hope in. He loses that O. Um, that was a tough fight to see. he got dropped like 4 or 5 times, hit with knees. Gafurov looked amazing that fight, and he got dominated on the ground. So Nakamura, I think, might need some easy fights, like three. He should be active and start building up some resume, help his own UFC resume in terms of getting wins. And then Clayton Carpenter is a guy who I actually thought is pretty good before the fight. I thought he had a ton of potential. He has some pretty decent wins, but Ulan Baikov is another dude on, training with Nurmagomedov with Makachev that he looked amazing in that fight. And Ulan Baikov, he might just be really good to be honest. So I don't lose a ton of hope in Carpenter. It would have been a ranked win for Carpenter. It would have been great for him to move up as far as he could have, but I'm not really too concerned about him. I'd say Peyton Talbot and Carpenter. I give them both like a B in terms of like potential, like not too much loss, could get to an A. And then Nakamura, I'd probably drop into like a D. That was a pretty bad loss, losing the O like that.
Yeah, I mean, the one guy I'll talk about here, I agree with pretty much everything you said. With Peyton Talbot as well, like you said, sometimes as a grappler, you just need to focus on wrestling. And especially in this division at 135, the more interesting it gets, the higher up you get, the less grappling and wrestling you really have to do. I mean, when we're looking at the top, obviously, you have guys like Marab, who you're going to have to go up and wrestle against. But there's so many guys too that you can stand and bang with, which would work perfect for Peyton Talbot, especially towards that top 15 if he can get up there.
The banging part, not just the standing part too. But
Yeah, your words, not mine.
yes.
But I
Hmm.
still think that this kid could be very good. I didn't really lose much hope for him after this fight. It's one of those fights where it's you didn't really get damaged that much. You were on the ground, you couldn't really get out of it. So it's not like you got beat to a pummel, got knocked out. So it's one of those fights where, yeah, you go back a little disappointed, but like I said before, sometimes it's better to lose at this point, and you really just have to realize what you have to go work on. I mean, this kid is still very young. He's 26. You could send him to Dagestan for 3 years, come back, he's 29, starting his prime after 3 years in Dagestan, and that would be perfect for him. Then um, at that point, Marab's going to be retired, so you don't have to worry about wrestling. And who knows what the top of the division is going to look like in 3 years, because guys like Henry Cejudo, another wrestler, are going to be gone. So who knows at that point? But I still think Peyton Talbot could be a great fighter in the future. I mean, he's only 26, so it's very hard to count out a guy like that. He's going to continue to get these favorable matchups. Maybe he wasn't ready for this one. Barcelos, a guy that was very underrated going into this fight as well. I mean, a guy that is up there for kind of towards that top 30-ish area. And this would have been a big win for Talbot as well. But obviously, maybe at this point in his career, it's not great to lose to Barcelos, but a guy that was pretty good in the past, when we talk about before the 2020 era, and that 2019, 2018. But since then, obviously losing to Umar. So who knows? Maybe Peyton Talbot will be able to come back from this. I think he will. He's still up there towards that top 50 of the bantamweight guys. He's going to get some favorable matchups and work his way back up. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. But next up, talking about our next UFC event, UFC Fight Night, where we are going to see Israel Adesanya versus Nasruddin Imavov in Saudi Arabia, February 1st, a 12 p.m. card. So middle of the day. Make sure you guys don't forget about that as well. So this will be an interesting card to look at. Some good fights on here. The main card is, I mean, almost better than the pay-per-view that we can talk about in a little bit. But that fight at the top, also Shara Bullet versus MVP, a very high-level striking bout that we're going to see at middleweight. That's going to be a very fun fight to watch. Pavlovich versus Rosenstrike, an interesting fight as well. Saeed Nurmagomedov versus Oliveira, another fun fight to watch as well. Ikram on here as well. A lot of other bigger names that we can see as well. A lot of bigger guys too. And Shamil, he's on here, a very big guy in the heavyweight division. And some other interesting guys, if you want to talk about them as well. Terrence McKinney's on this card, Jordan Levitt. So some guys with some names behind them as well. So a pretty good card to start the year for a fight night, in my opinion. It is a Saudi Arabia fight night, so it's not a Salt Lake City one. This is one where Dana White wants to make it a big fight, has a pretty big main event. So how do you feel about this card? Is there any fights you want to talk about specifically as well outside of those top three that we can talk about specifically?
Yeah, so the first thing I was surprised to see that many women's fights on there, which is one women's fight in Saudi
Hmm.
Arabia. But it is a great card, and I would probably say it's better than 312. The entire main card of this is as good as the 312 card. And one guy I'd like to say is Vinicius Locked Oliveira is a great bantamweight. I'm a huge fan of him. He had a fantastic flying knee. So Saeed Nurmagomedov, it's kind of like a kickboxer too. So that would be a great matchup between two guys, probably top 20 bantamweights. Winner will get a ranked fight after that. That would be really fun. I love Oliveira. And then going down, we have Terrence McKinney is kind of like Kevin Holland. He's like the future version of Kevin Holland. What will happen to him? So he's either getting knocked out in 2 seconds or he'll win in 2 seconds. So we will definitely see. But I would say Oliveira is the fight I'm most excited for outside of the top three. But Aliskerov he was supposed to be one of these guys now. Like if he beat Whitaker, he'd be at the top of the rankings. It'd be looking a lot different. So I'm very, very pumped for the top three fights on this card and probably more pumped for 312, to be honest.
Yeah, that may be a little bit of sarcasm. I guess we can talk about that in a little bit. But talking about these first, I guess these final three fights. First off, with Sergey versus Rosenstrike, that's going to be an interesting fight to see, especially towards the top of this division. Like we said, it just seems like it gets more complicated the more fights that we get. Pavlovich, a pretty heavy favorite at minus 265, but as we know with heavyweights, you never really know what's going to happen. Obviously, a 4 versus a 9 guy, this would be a lot bigger of a win for Rosenstrike than for Pavlovich. But if Pavlovich wins, he keeps his area of that top five. So I think that'll be an interesting one. Like I said before, Shara versus MVP. This is going to be a very, very good fight. Shara minus 185 favorite, so very close. I think a lot of these fights on this card are going to be close. There's not very many fights where there's a very heavy favorite throughout this whole card. Pretty much most of them are pretty close in the odds as of right now, especially in those last three fights. So that'll be a very big fight towards the bottom of the rankings, 14 versus 15, but both of these guys can put on a very big fight. Will Shar be able to keep that O? It'll be interesting to see in that fight specifically. And then Izzy versus Imavov. I still don't really know how to feel about Imavov. I know he's good, but he's one of those guys where I've watched, most of his most recent fights every time that he's fought recently. And I think he's good, but it still feels like I'm missing something. And I'm not as high on him as others, but this is one of those fights where you can see if he goes out and wins this fight, he really is that guy in this division and would probably get the next title fight, in my opinion. But who knows? I mean, we still have a lot of guys towards the top. Obviously, we have Sean Strickland fighting for the belt. And also, we have to wait for Kamzat to get that fight. So I don't know. Very interesting at the top. So, how do you feel about this Imavov versus Izzy fight? Because hypothetically, if Imavov wins, he goes to two above Kamzat, who's at three, but they already say that Kamzat's going to get the next title shot. So, what goes on?
So there's a lot to look at in middleweight on this card, obviously, but Imavov is on a great run. I do agree, though. Like, I feel like he's kind of seen as like a blue chip prospect right now, and I think he's very good. But Brendan Allen was on a huge kind of win column going into it, and he was supposed to be that next guy up, and Imavov really did very, very well against him. He completely slowed down Allen's hype. So Imavov is very good, but we've seen him lose before. Even like Strickland did great against Imavov, which maybe doesn't age well now because Strickland is that number one contender right now. But this is do or die for Izzy. I'll say it. I love Izzy. I had him beating DDP. DDP looked great against him, but Izzy did look pretty good that fight. I'd say the first few rounds,
Hmm.
but it's a really weird spot for Izzy. It's headlining a fight night is probably not what any UFC fan expected when you look 3 or 4 years ago. But uh, I'm still very high on Izzy. He's just stringing these losses together, doesn't look great. So this will be huge for him. I don't know what he does. He won't retire after this, but you're not even on a pay-per-view anymore. It is Saudi. They want the big names. I get it. But if you lose to Imavov, I don't know where you go from here if you're Izzy, because that just shows you're not a contender anymore for the belt. If DDP just choked you out for the first time ever, and then you're going to lose to Imavov on a fight night. But I do think Izzy will do very well. And because we won't be recording until after 312, I'll say I do think Izzy gets the win. I'm not very high on Imavov. I'm still probably too high on Izzy, to be honest. I still remember him too fondly during his peak, I think, but I think Izzy's a great striker still. He still has it. And it's really stylistically where he tends to lose fights. And Imavov does have good striking. He has good wrestling. So I think if Izzy has a good game plan for the fight, he could. I think he's much faster on the feet than Imavov is. But I'd like to go down. My favorite fight on this card is going to be Shar Bullet versus MVP. These are two amazing prospects. I love MVP. I love Shar Bullet. Shar Bullet still has his O, but I'm going to be taking MVP in this fight. I picked Petro Sayan against Shara Bullet, which was very wrong. Shara had a crazy KO against him, but Petro Sayan is a whole lot worse than MVP is. And we've seen it from Kevin Holland, Andy, and Gary. Michael Page was faster than both of those guys, much faster. And Kevin Holland, I guess, used to be a better name, but Ian Gary has a ton of stock right now in his name, in his striking. So I think that Shar is very one dimensional. He has not great wrestling at all, which I do have to respect that being, from where he's from, the Dagestan. Guys don't usually like to kickbox as much as he does. He is a very good kickboxer. His kicks are fast, twitchy. He throws them all the time. But MVP is the guy we're going to see if Shar is for real or not. And in my opinion, I know it's the 14 versus the 15. If Shara wins this fight, that means he's a great striker. He's proven that he can defend against guys who wrestle in the past. I think you give him a top 10 fight after this. I think someone who I wanted to see is with Peyton Talbot do is where you push your stars who are blue chip prospects, generational prospects. Like O'Malley got pushed up so fast. If Talbot won last weekend, I wanted him to get a ranked fight, honestly. Montel Jackson maybe at 15. So for Shara Bullet, if he wins, maybe even Brendan Allen, who knows these names in the top 10. But I do think Michael Page will get the win here, proving he's a faster striker. I think the one thing Shar is good at is kickboxing, and I think MVP is maybe a little faster than he is. So this will be a great fight at the bottom of the rankings.
Yeah. The thing about this too, as well, is for both of these guys, it is really a must-win fight. For MVP, you're 37 years old at this point. You're still pretty fast, like you said, but you lose this fight. You're 0-2 in your last two fights. Yes, they were tough fights, but you're not going to be able to fight forever. This is really when you have to make that push towards the top, and that's why they gave him that Ian Gary fight, because if he won that, the whole landscape of this division is very different at this point. But it is going to be interesting as well because there are a lot of young guys in this division. Yes, towards the top, there are some older guys that are going to start to fall out, as we know, like guys like Paulo Costa, who are, I mean, I don't know, he's in a weird spot right now. He's still ranked. He is still 33, but he's in a weird spot in my opinion because he's lost those past two. I mean, he got outboxed by Sean Strickland and was just his punching bag in that fight. But Sean Strickland could be the champion after another fight. So who knows? Maybe that's not a terrible loss for him. But like you said, Shara Bullet wins. It would be very interesting to see where they give him a guy within the top 10. Maybe a guy like Paulo Costa, a guy that could move him up as well. MVP, another guy that would be interesting to see where we could see if he gets a win here. He'll be fighting within that top 10 again. Obviously, guys that we talked about before, RDR also in this conversation of these blue chip prospects in this area. If you really want to push these guys, another guy, Bo Nickel, who's in that top 25 area. So there are a lot of these guys where we could get some pretty fun matchups towards the top. Ikram as well, like we saw. Yes, that last loss against Robert Whitaker, but if he won that, he would be higher up as well. If he wins, which he's a pretty big favorite. So there are a lot of guys up here towards the top, that middle area that aren't ranked yet. But all these guys that I just mentioned could easily be ranked soon with guys like RDR, Ikram, Bo Nickel, whoever wins this fight this weekend, or I guess in 2 weeks from now, would be in that top 10 area. So if we're talking about areas and weight classes that we're excited for in the future, middleweight is definitely the best in my opinion right now. I think I'm probably the most excited about middleweight as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one last thing on the card is MVP's advanced age. I think if he does get a win here, I think they should let him, as such an established guy from Bellator, make a run at the belt. Obviously not right now, but I think the next fight you give him someone like Costa, Brendan Allen, maybe a top 10 guy around there. And if he wins that, I say give him a top five. Like I think at his age, he probably has like what, a year, maybe a little more left. Maybe that means 3 or 4 UFC fights left. So I think for him, you reward him, either of these guys with a win, very much so. And then right before we move on to 312 and the middleweight fight there, I'll say another Bellator guy that got signed is Patricky Pitbull. As Bellator folded, a lot of those guys are moving over possibly. PFL looks like it's run terribly right now. So there's a ton of guys, but one more fight I'd like to just randomly throw out there is I think Patricky Pitbull could be a name for someone like Michael Chandler as a rematch, or even maybe somebody like Volkanovski. Um, because as we move on to 312, we said it before, the card is straight up terrible. It's the worst pay-per-view card in my opinion since 297, the start of last year, between Strickland and DDP with a women's co-main, where the card was absolutely terrible. But the reason I bring it up is because of how bad this main card is. The only fights that are main card pay-per-view worthy is Zhang Wei Li, who is my favorite women's fighter. Very, very good. No disrespect to her. And then obviously DDP, who is making a name for himself in the UFC, a top 10 pound for pound guy. But I'm still, for some reason, have optimism that we might even see Volkanovski somehow added to this card. He's done short notice before, but I think I'm still coping really hard how bad it is that they don't have more Australian, New Zealand, and Zach guys like Volk, who haven't fought in a while, or Izzy, who maybe is New Zealand, maybe Chinese, fighting on a paper or on a fight night right before. But and what are your thoughts about the main card for 312?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's a joke. Like I think there's people always say that maybe the UFC should do the WWE route where we got two guys coming out and it's a surprise on who's going to fight. And I feel like that's what's going to happen here in three of the fights because when I'm looking at this card, the main card, we're looking at Justin Tafa as the guy who's supposed to be the whatever the feature fight. This is the guy that we're looking at right now. I know Textera, the guy that he's fighting against, some people are excited about. He's 25 years old. He's a heavyweight. The UFC is trying to bring him in and be this exciting guy that you can bring in at 25 years old. I really just don't care about this main card outside of those two championship fights. It's just terrible, honestly. Like, at least when we look back and we were talking about how bad UFC 297 was before. When we look at that, at least you have guys like Neil Magny, who was on the main card, Chris Curtis, Arnold Allen versus Eve Lvov. Even before that, the prelims, there weren't great fights on there. But at least we got those fights and guys that people knew of in Neil Magny, Chris Curtis, and Arnold Allen versus Mavzar as well. In this one, like just looking at these guys on the main card, it's just guys that who is really excited for this card, in my opinion. Like, I think if you're the UFC, you have to do something. There's no way that you can go out and have this card and have people try to get excited about this. Because when I look through these guys, there's not even guys on the prelims that I'm pretty excited to see, if I'm being honest. Like most of the time, there's guys that are further down that I'm excited to see. I just really don't care about most of these fights at all, if any of them, besides the two main fights. And that's really rare. I can't remember the last time where I wasn't even excited about a prelim fight or a guy that, like, I have to try to get myself excited for this card, which is sad in my opinion, because the UFC has done so well with trying to just build up these cards. And maybe this is the point where we're really going to get a bad card. The one name that people have been talking about is we're supposed to get excited about Mr. Taporia's brother on here, but like that doesn't get me that excited, if I'm being honest. Like it'll be cool to see him, but if that's the third fight that I'm really supposed to get excited about, then you've really made a bad card here.
Yeah, it is really strange. It seems like DDP has done so much to push his name through the press conferences, through his huge victories. He's become a guy that people, including me, completely counted off to now being one of the most dominant champs in the UFC, assuming he wins here. But Justin Tafa is kind of on that tied to Ivasa level where they're the big heavyweights that are just straight up not good, no gas tank, don't even try. And it seems like those type of guys, Tafa, Tuivasa, Junior Tafa, that are kind of failed like projects by the UFC of pushing Australian fighters and fight New Zealand and the whole region. But it's they have successful guys. The region's done very well, in my opinion. For Australia and New Zealand, Oceania as a whole has a ton of amazing fighters. So I just don't get why they're not on this card. Like you have Dan Hooker, who is at the same kickboxing team as Izzy in New Zealand, with a ton of successful fighters, is on 313. Like that seems the same. Maybe they couldn't get it in time, but you could throw Dan Hooker on here. Volkanovski always wants to fight. He wanted to fight on 311. Could throw him on here too. Another guy. There's so many great Australians that could be on this card that are just simply missing from it. But the main card itself, like Teixeira is one of the most hyped guys from DWS last season. He's a 6'8" heavyweight with stone hands, but he's a hyped DWCS guy. That's not the same thing as a hyped ranked UFC fighter on a main card. He should be on the prelims of a fight night where he gets a huge knockout, and you're like, wow, that guy's pretty good. Not on the main card of a pay per view, but I agree. Tapuria also kind of has a stat padded record. Who knows how good he really is, but not really excited for many people on this card. And there's so many UFC fighters that are inactive recently that seem to be wanting fights. Guys like Rafael Fiziev has been begging for a fight, who are very talented. And you would think they would, with how good the UFC has done with these massive cards, 311, 310, these have been fantastic cards. You can't complain about those at all. But this one is just so weak, it's surprising. I think maybe that having two champs on there is an excuse for them, but yeah, I'm not really sure the last time I could give an example of this happening, but it seems like they're gonna put in like a Royal Rumble, like a mystery fighter. Um, McGregor, I don't even know anymore. I can't even. It just seems confusing to roll out a card this terrible and then have such great cards around it. Doesn't make sense why you wouldn't balance it out more.
Yeah, and this is one of those cards that, people complain about, oh, this card may not be great. I've not heard a single person say this card is good. Not even good, like at the level of okay. I don't think this is an okay card. This is bad. Like another guy that they were watching, Joe Rogan and Daniel Cormier try to hype up this card on the pay-per-view when they were looking forward at 311. I mean, it was hard to watch because even Joe Rogan was talking about these guys where he's like, oh, we get to see the return of Jimmy Crute. Like this guy he's 0-3 with a draw in there as well. So 0-3-1 in his past four. He's coming back. I don't care that he's coming back. I didn't want him to come back. The UFC is bringing these guys back, and I don't know. I don't know what's going on with this card. Like cool, you have Jake Matthews on there. I guess if I don't even know. I don't know what's going on with this card. There's just there. I don't know how you fix this. Maybe this is where we talked about last week. If you haven't watched that episode yet, the second plug. So if you still haven't watched it, make sure to go watch that. Maybe this is where they bring in the Money in the Bank ladder match. Maybe this is where they bring out the Conor McGregor versus Logan Paul boxing match. maybe this is where KSI comes out. Something's got to happen. I don't care what it is, but there's no way that Dana White can look at this card and be happy about it. So I don't know. Put Kevin Holland on this. If he wants to fight 6 times, put him on there. I don't care who he fights. I need something else because this is the worst card that I've ever seen that has been built, and I don't understand why. Because there's so many guys that don't have a fight right now. And I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I don't know who approved of this, and I don't know how to fix it because it seems like they don't want to fix it.
Yeah, it is weird because there's so many with all the GWS guys. He's signing on a 10 and 10. All these guys coming over from Bellator. Like I thought for sure Pitbull when he announced, I thought it would be him or Chandler or him or Volk, 100% fighting on this card, but nothing has been announced. The clock's ticking. It's straight up weird. Guy Carlos Olberg, he has a ton of fans, not on the card, fighting in the same time period. There's just so many guys uh from the region that could be on the card and they just don't have on there. Like JDM, I know Leon is in England, but another great ranked
I
guy.
care France, Steve Ursag.
Yep, yep. There's like, and that it just proves the point that they have talent in the region. They love the UFC down there. They host pay-per-views every year, it seems like, and they give them such a terrible card to reward it. But it's just interesting to me that they're rolling out such a terrible card, honestly. Um, I definitely won't be paying for it. I'll put it that way. And yeah, I'm really not. I can't think of any examples where they tweak a card, like add fights on a card this late without already
Yeah,
announcing it. Because you would think you would want to announce it earlier to build up hype for it, but maybe Volk just goes out there, maybe does a halftime performance concert before the main card or something. You need something to build excitement. DDP has done so much for the UFC. He made Strickland and Izzy cry in their press conferences. He's built so much tension in middleweight, and it seems like they're doing nothing to reward him and not give him any pay-per-view points for this pretty terrible card.
yeah, I mean DDP is not even going to be able to get a meal after this for the pay-per-view points. Like this is, I don't know what's going on because at this point I was expecting. We talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but sometimes they add those fights. I was expecting when they were talking about 312, oh, we're gonna announce another fight, but it just doesn't seem like anything's changing right now. Like there's nothing's gonna change on this card, and you have 2 championship fights. That's cool, but you don't even have ranked guys on the main card. Like this is, I don't know. I don't know what you do at this point to save this card, but you need to do something because at this point, I mean, like you said, I don't know who, there's not going to be any pay-per-view points for this for DDP, which is unfortunate because that last card against Izzy was great. With all those fights on there as well. That was actually decent. People were excited about that one, but I don't know. I don't know how you can fix this. And it doesn't seem like they're going to, which is unfortunate to see because I don't know. Like at this, I've never seen a card where there's no ranked fighters outside of the championship fights. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't know how, but Dana White needs to figure this out because we're looking at a fight night the week before that has a top 5 fight in the main event, which makes sense. Outside of that, 2 top 15 guys in Shar versus MVP, Sergey versus Rosenstrike, another top 10 fight as well. At least I don't know. I don't know how you fix this, but something's got to happen, or no one's gonna watch this outside of the main 2 fights.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that Dana, like, no one questions when you have UFC London. I don't question it. They get the best English fighters. When you
Mhm.
have UFC in Saudi Arabia, I don't question it when they stack the cards because they want to appeal to people there. But now on a pay-per-view, you don't stack the card at all. Doesn't really make sense. Last time they were there at 305, it was incredible. Um, Drickus did amazing. Izzy has a ton of fans down there himself. Kai Car friends, Dan Hooker, Steve Ersteg, all these guys that are in the timeline to fight again. They all fought, however, 5 or whatever months ago in Australia. Now they're all ready to fight again. Like, why not just have the same guys who the fans love down there fight again? Have Tai Tuivasa fight. If he loses, you get the cut him live in front of everybody. But
Mm.
it's just I guess we'll end it on a pretty depressing note. But I hope the next time we record, which will be after 312, and you guys listen to the episode, we'll be announcing that Volk knocked out Conor McGregor to fight for the belt. Something I hope, but it seems unlikely at this point.
Yeah, we're gonna need, hopefully by the time we record, something changes. But if not, uh it may be a very, very big episode for the for hating. Like this episode, we went a little bit light. But next episode, if the card doesn't change, there may be a lot of hating going on in that episode. People like to say that Dana White isn't a great matchmaker sometimes, which I don't agree with. They've had some pretty good matchmakings with these cards. I don't know what's going on in this card though. So hopefully that gets figured out by the next episode, and hopefully we have a good episode for you guys next time.
Yeah, no promises there on the card though, but we will have a good episode to you. I hope we're a lot happier, but we should. Um, I'm not really looking forward to covering Jimmy Crute or Jim Matthews for an hour for each of them. So I hope there's more exciting names here, but uh yeah, that will be the next time you see us, which is after 312. So hope it's in a better mood for that.
Yep. And we'll see you guys then. Thanks for watching all the episodes. If you haven't watched any of them yet, make sure to go back, especially the one that we just uploaded before this with our end of the year for 2024 awards. And we'll see you guys in the next episode in a few weeks.
Peace.